7-year-old boy, orphaned and alone, finds refuge in a cardboard box behind a bakery. Despite hunger and misery, he shares the little he has and unknowingly carries a gift that turns pain into hope. When he touches a paralyzed man who has lost his faith, he awakens the man's first movement in a decade and a chance for redemption. But the true miracle happens when a child's simple love teaches a millionaire to walk again, in body and in soul. Before we begin this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like on the video, which is very important to us, and tell us which city you're watching this story from. Night was falling over London like a heavy, silent cloak. In the West London area, between the bustling streets of Notting Hill and the forgotten alleys that cut through the neighborhood, there existed a world invisible to the hurried eyes of the big city. It was there, behind a bakery that exuded the sweet smell of fresh bread during the day, that a 7-year-old boy named Gabriel found his refuge every night. The cardboard box that served as his home didn't have much to offer besides protection from the cold wind that blew in the early London mornings. Gabriel organized it carefully, folding the flaps to form a sort of makeshift roof, and lined the floor with newspaper pages he collected from the sidewalks. It wasn't much, but it was his. It was the only place in the world where he could close his eyes without fear of being shooed away. Gabriel's story was like so many others lost in the noise of this immense metropolis. His mother, Lucy, had passed away just 3 months earlier, taken by a swift and devastating illness that left no time for goodbyes or preparations. She was all the boy had. With no known father, no living grandparents, no aunts, uncles or cousins who could take responsibility, Gabriel found himself alone overnight. The neighbors in the tenement building where they lived tried to help in the first few weeks, but life was already too hard for everyone. No one could take on another mouth to feed. That's how Gabriel came to know the streets. In the first few days he cried until he had no tears left. He called for his mother in the dark corners, hoping she would appear to get him, just as she did when he got lost at the market. But she didn't come back. She would never come back, and the boy had to learn, on his own, the cruel rules of urban survival. The Our Daily Bread bakery was run by Mrs. Irene, a woman with white hair and kind eyes who was well past 70. She was the first person to notice the scrawny little boy sleeping behind her establishment. Instead of chasing him away as so many others had, Mrs. Irene began leaving day-old bread in a plastic bag by the back door, always at the end of the night when she closed the bakery. Gabriel would never forget the first time he found that bag. He opened it with trembling hands, almost in disbelief. There were 3 bread rolls, hard but still edible, and a piece of stale cake. He ate one of the rolls right there, feeling tears stream down his thin face. It was the first decent food he'd had in days. But even with hunger gnawing at him, he saved the other 2 rolls. He knew there were other people in the area who needed it too. That's how he met Mr. Walter and Mrs. Teresa. Mr. Walter was a man who must have been in his late 60s, completely blind, who spent his days sitting on a corner asking passers-by for change. No one really knew his story, but Gabriel quickly realized the old man never managed to collect enough money for even a snack. Mrs. Teresa was different. She spoke to herself, sometimes shouting at people no one else could see, living in a world of her own inside her confused mind. The other homeless people avoided her, but Gabriel felt a deep compassion for her. That first night, he shared the bread with them. Mr. Walter held the boy's small hand and thanked him with a choked voice. Mrs. Teresa stopped talking to herself for a few seconds and smiled, a rare and genuine smile that lit up her dirty face. And it was in that moment, touching the blind old man's calloused hands, that something strange happened. Gabriel felt a warmth rise up his arms, a comforting and powerful sensation coming from somewhere inside, him that he couldn't explain. Mr. Walter's empty eyes widened, and he said that his back, which had been aching for weeks, suddenly felt better. The boy didn't understand what had happened. He thought it was a coincidence, that the old man was just being kind. But it wasn't a coincidence. In the following days, Gabriel noticed that whenever he touched someone who was truly suffering, something happened. They weren't spectacular miracles, but small reliefs. A headache that would pass, a fever that would break, a tired body that found rest. He didn't understand it as a supernatural gift. For Gabriel, it was just his way of sharing the kindness his mother had always taught him. Lucy used to say that you're never truly poor when you have love in your heart to share, and the boy took that to heart. While Gabriel struggled to survive on the streets of Notting Hill, on the other side of the city, in the affluent neighbourhood of Knightsbridge, inside an imposing mansion surrounded by high walls and impeccable gardens, lived a completely different man. His name was Edward Alistair Sinclair, and he was the owner of a fortune built over decades of work in the real estate sector. Buildings, shopping malls, luxury condominiums. The Sinclair name was stamped all over London. But what good was all that money if Edward couldn't even get out of his wheelchair? It had been 10 years since the accident that robbed him of the movement in his legs. A stupid accident, mundane even. A wet road, a car spinning out of control. Edward survived, but he was never the same. From that day on, his luxurious life turned into a prison of marble and crystal. His wife Helen left 2 years after the accident. She couldn't bear to watch her husband sink into bitterness and depression. Their children were already adults with their own lives in other countries. They visited once or twice a year, fulfilling a family protocol. Edward had only his staff and his niece, Monica, the daughter of his late brother. Monica appeared in Edward's life shortly after Helen left. She showed up with tears in her eyes, saying her uncle was the only family she had left, that she wanted to take care of him. Edward, fragile and lonely, accepted her presence. He gave her a wing of the mansion, a generous allowance, unrestricted access. He never noticed that his niece's eyes shone not with love but with ambition. Monica had planned everything coldly. She knew she was in the will, but she wanted to ensure she inherited everything. To do that, she needed to keep Edward isolated, dependent, and above all, convinced that she was the only person who cared about him. It was she who hired the nurse, Marcus, a tall, muscular man with a dubious history, but who knew how to do the dirty work without leaving a trace. Marcus treated Edward with a subtle brutality. When no one was around, he would grip too tightly when helping his employer get dressed, push the wheelchair with deliberate jolts, and make snide remarks about his condition. Edward complained to Monica a few times, but she always defended Marcus, saying her uncle was being overly sensitive, that nurses had a difficult job. The only employee who treated Edward with dignity was Joseph, the driver who had worked for the family for over 20 years. Joseph knew Edward when he was still a vibrant and ambitious man. He saw the rise of the Sinclair empire, witnessed the happy marriage with Helen, and watched their children be born. And now he watched with sadness as his employer withered away in that enormous mansion, surrounded by luxury, but completely alone. It was on a rainy Tuesday that fate decided to intertwine these two very different lives. Edward had a doctor's appointment at the London clinic, another physical therapy session that brought no results. Joseph drove the black Mercedes carefully through the wet London streets, listening to his employer's bitter grumbling from the back seat. They were returning from the hospital, crossing through Notting Hill, when the car's engine started to make a strange noise. Joseph frowned, concerned. The noise grew louder, and suddenly white smoke began to pour from under the hood. There was no choice but to pull over. By a twist of fate, they stopped right in front of the Our Daily Bread bakery, where Gabriel slept every night. It was late afternoon. Gabriel was sitting on the sidewalk watching the traffic when he saw the Mercedes park. Cars like that weren't common in this area. His eyes lit up with a spark of hope. Maybe the driver had some spare change. He stood up, wiped his dirty hands on his torn shorts, and approached timidly. Joseph had the hood open, inspecting the engine with concern. It wasn't a mechanical problem. The radiator hose had burst. He would have to call a tow truck. In the back seat, Edward watched through the tinted window with a bored expression. Gabriel tapped lightly on the rear window. Edward opened it just a crack, already prepared to dismiss another beggar. "What do you want, boy?" The voice was cold, sharp, but Gabriel wasn't frightened. He was used to rejection. "Mister, do you have any spare change, just a little, to buy some bread?" Edward rolled his eyes. Another street kid wanting money. He was about to send him away with a harsh phrase when something made him stop. He took a better look at the boy. He noticed the large, dark eyes, the sickly thinness, the ragged clothes. But it wasn't the miserable appearance that surprised him. It was something else. In that boy's eyes there was something Edward hadn't seen in a long time. There was pain, yes, but there was also kindness. A pure and innocent kindness that touched something dormant inside the businessman's hardened chest. "I don't have any change," Edward replied, more softly than he intended. Gabriel smiled without resentment. "That's okay, mister. God bless you." The boy was about to walk away when he noticed that the man inside the car seemed as lonely as he was. There was something in his eyes, a deep sadness that Gabriel knew well. It was the same sadness he saw in the broken mirror in the alley, in the rare moments he could look at himself. "You're sad," Gabriel said, with the brutal honesty of children. Edward blinked, surprised. "What?" "Your eyes. They're sad. Like mine when I think about my mum." "Your mother," Edward repeated, feeling a strange pang in his chest. "Where is she?" "She's gone. She's not here anymore. But I know she's watching me from somewhere." Edward swallowed hard. There was an innocence in the way the boy spoke about loss that was both touching and devastating. This boy had lost his mother, was alone in the world, and yet he could still smile. Before Edward could respond, Gabriel extended his small, dirty hand through the crack in the window. "Can I hold your hand? My mum said it helps when you're sad." It was such a simple, pure request that Edward couldn't refuse. Hesitantly, he reached out his hand and touched the boy's. The exact moment their skin met, something extraordinary happened. A wave of heat coursed through Edward's body, starting in his hand and radiating down to his paralyzed legs. It was as if 1,000 needles of light were piercing his dead muscles. And then, for the first time in 10 years, Edward felt something, a tingling, a tiny movement in his right big toe. His eyes widened, his mouth agape. He looked down at his own legs, then at the boy. Gabriel was smiling, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "Better, mister?" the boy asked. Edward couldn't answer. He was in shock. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. But he had felt it. For the first time in a decade, he had felt his legs. His toe had moved, he was sure of it. Joseph closed the hood and approached the master's window. "Mr. Sinclair, I'll have to call a tow truck. The hose burst." But Edward barely heard him. He was fixated on the boy, who was already walking away down the sidewalk. "Wait!" Edward shouted with an urgency that surprised even himself. Gabriel stopped and looked back. "What's your name, boy?" "Gabriel." "Gabriel." Edward repeated the name, savoring each syllable. "Gabriel, I want you to come with me, to my home." The boy blinked, confused. "Your home?" "Yes, you're going to live with me." "But mister, I don't even know you." Edward couldn't explain what he was feeling, a mixture of hope, fear, and excitement he hadn't experienced in years. If this boy had really made his legs move, even for a second, then he was the answer Edward had been searching for a decade. It was the chance to walk again, to live again. "It doesn't matter, you need a place to stay, don't you? And I can offer that, a bed, food, clean clothes." Gabriel glanced from the car window towards the mansion, then looked back at his cardboard box behind the bakery. It was an obvious choice, but something inside him hesitated. He didn't know this man, he didn't know if he could trust him. It was Joseph who broke the impasse. The driver knelt beside the boy and spoke in a gentle voice. "You can trust Mr. Sinclair, kid. He's a man of his word. If he's offering help, it's because he truly means it." Gabriel looked into Joseph's honest eyes and felt he could believe him. He nodded, still uncertain. "Okay, I'll go." Edward smiled. It was a small smile, rusty from disuse, but a smile nonetheless. It had been so long since he had truly smiled that he had almost forgotten what it felt like. The tow truck arrived half an hour later and towed the Mercedes to the mansion. During the taxi ride, Edward watched Gabriel in the rearview mirror. The boy stared out the window with wide eyes, marveling at the city he already knew so well, but which he now saw from inside a car for the first time as a passenger, and not as a resident of its streets. When they arrived at the mansion in Knightsbridge, Gabriel got out of the car and stood frozen at the entrance, intimidated. The electronic gate opened to reveal vast gardens, ornamental fountains, and a house that looked like a palace. He had never imagined such places actually existed. Mrs. Irene from the bakery saw everything from her window. She saw the boy get into the car with the rich man. Her heart tightened with worry, but also with hope. Perhaps this was the miracle Gabriel deserved. Inside the mansion, Monica was watching from the living room window when she saw her uncle arrive accompanied by a ragged boy. She frowned, suspicious. What was this? Edward never brought anyone home. She ran down the stairs, already preparing a fake smile. "Uncle, who is this boy?" she asked, keeping her tone sweet as always. "This is Gabriel. He's going to live with us," Edward replied, with a firmness that left no room for argument. Monica blinked, processing the information. "Live here? But uncle, don't you think that's a bit hasty?" "It's none of your business, Monica. Arrange a room for him, the best guest room, and clean clothes and food. The boy must be starving." The niece clenched her fists, keeping the frozen smile on her face. This was unacceptable. A street kid invading the mansion, winning her uncle's attention. She needed to act, and fast. But that night, as Gabriel took his first hot bath in months and put on clean pajamas, eating his fill for the first time since his mother passed, Edward Sinclair felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt hope. And that big toe that had moved, even for an instant, was proof that miracles were still possible. What neither of them knew was that this was just the first page of a story that would change both their lives forever. Gabriel's first days in the mansion were like living in a dream he feared waking from at any moment. The room Monica reluctantly prepared for him was larger than the entire tenement building where he had lived with his mother. The bed had a soft mattress, fragrant sheets, and pillows so fluffy that Gabriel sank into them as if floating on clouds. There was a private bathroom for him, with hot water that came out whenever he wanted, and clean towels every day. The housekeeper, Rose, a kind-eyed, dark-haired woman who had worked at the mansion for 5 years, took on the task of caring for the boy. It was she who helped him adapt, who explained how things worked in this world so different from his own. Rose had a son, Gabriel's age, who lived with his grandmother in the countryside, and she treated the boy with the maternal affection he missed so much. Gabriel woke up on the first day confused, not knowing where he was. For a terrifying instant he thought it had all been a dream, but then he looked around, saw the light-colored walls, felt the comfort of the bed, and remembered. It was real. All of it was real. He had breakfast in the kitchen with Rose and Joseph. The table was laden with fresh bread, colorful fruits, natural juices, and homemade cakes. Gabriel ate slowly, savoring each bite, still in disbelief at such abundance. Between bites, he asked about the man who had brought him there. "Mr. Sinclair is a good man," Joseph explained, sipping his black coffee. "Life hasn't been kind to him these past few years, but deep down, he has a generous heart. He's just a little lost." "And that lady who gave me a mean look yesterday?" Gabriel asked with the frankness of a child. Rose and Joseph exchanged meaningful glances. The housekeeper sighed before answering. "Miss Monica is his niece. She lives here and helps take care of him. It's just her way, a bit serious sometimes." But Gabriel, even at just 7 years old, had an intuition sharpened by life on the streets. He knew how to recognize falsehood when he saw it. And Monica's eyes weren't just serious. They were cold, they were dangerous. After breakfast, it was Rose who took Gabriel to the living room where Edward spent most of his time. It was an enormous room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the garden. Edward was in his wheelchair, staring outside without really seeing anything, lost in bitter thoughts. "Mr. Sinclair, Gabriel is here," Rose announced in a soft voice. The businessman turned his chair and faced the boy. In the daylight, with clean clothes and a washed face, Gabriel looked even thinner and more fragile than the day before. But his eyes were still the same, large, dark, and full of that inexplicable kindness. "Good morning," Gabriel said, still shy. "Good morning, Gabriel. Did you sleep well?" "Better than ever, sir. Thank you for everything." Edward nodded and dismissed Rose with a gesture. When they were alone, the silence hung heavy between them. Neither of them knew exactly what to say. It was Gabriel who broke the tension. "Do you want me to hold your hand again?" Edward hesitated. He had thought about it all night. He hadn't been able to sleep well. Torn between irrational hope and the fear that he had imagined everything. Had that movement in his toe been real, or just a reflex, an illusion created by desperation? "Yes," he finally answered. "Yes, I do." Gabriel approached and, without ceremony, took Edward's large, calloused hand between his small ones. He closed his eyes, as he always did when trying to help someone, and took a deep breath. Edward once again felt that warmth rise up his arms, that strange and comforting sensation that was impossible to describe with words. The minutes passed in silence. Gabriel held the businessman's hand firmly, and Edward felt his entire body relax in a way it hadn't in years. The tension in his shoulders, the chronic pain in his back, everything seemed to diminish. And then it happened. His toes moved. Not just one, but several. Edward felt the clear, undeniable movement inside his shoes. "My toes," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Gabriel, my toes are moving." The boy opened his eyes and smiled, that pure, genuine smile that lit up his thin face. "That's good, mister. Your will to get better is strong. I can feel it." Edward looked at the boy with a mixture of astonishment and gratitude. He didn't know what was happening, didn't understand how it was possible, but it didn't matter. For the first time in 10 years, there was real hope for recovery. From that day on, they established a routine. Gabriel would come to the living room every morning after breakfast and hold Edward's hands for 20 minutes. Sometimes they would sit in silence, other times they would talk. The boy would tell stories about his life on the streets, about Mr. Walter and Mrs. Teresa, about the cold nights and hungry days. Edward listened, fascinated, ashamed, of his own complaints when compared to the real suffering that child had endured. As the weeks went by, Edward's improvement became undeniable. First, it was his toes, then the movement of his ankles. Within a month, he could bend his knees. The doctors who monitored him were astonished. They called it a miraculous recovery, a delayed response to previous treatments. But Edward knew the truth. It wasn't conventional medicine, it was Gabriel. The boy was changing too. He was gaining weight, his cheeks grew fuller, his eyes shone with health. Rose cared for him as if he were her own son. Joseph took him for drives around the city on weekends, and even the other staff members grew fond of the polite and gentle little boy who had appeared out of nowhere. But not all was well in the Sinclair mansion. Monica watched everything with growing irritation. She saw her uncle smiling again, saw him excited about life for the first time in years, and worse, she saw Gabriel winning a larger and larger space in Edward's heart. This was unacceptable. It had to end. It was on a Thursday afternoon that Monica executed her first plan. She waited until Edward was napping to enter Gabriel's room. The boy was there, drawing in a notebook Rose had given him. When he saw Monica enter, he stood up politely. "Hi, Miss Monica." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Gabriel, we need to talk. It's about my uncle." "Is he okay?" the boy asked, worried. "He's getting better too quickly, and that worries me. You see, Uncle Edward is a very wealthy man. There are bad people who might want to take advantage of him. Do you understand that?" Gabriel frowned, confused. He didn't understand where she was going with this. "I just want to help him get better, Miss Monica. I don't want anything else." Monica knelt to be at the boy's level, with a false expression of concern. "I know, dear, but not everyone will believe that. Some people might think you're faking it, that you're tricking my uncle to get money. It would be terrible if someone called the police or sent you back to the streets, wouldn't it?" Fear crossed Gabriel's face like a shadow. Going back to the streets was his worst nightmare. To face hunger, cold, and loneliness again. "I'm not tricking anyone," he said in a trembling voice. "I swear." "I believe you," Monica lied. "But for your own good, I think it's best if you don't tell anyone about these hand-holding sessions with my uncle. Let it be our little secret, okay?" Gabriel nodded, disturbed. Monica left the room, satisfied. She had planted the first seed of doubt. It was just the beginning. The next day, Marcus, the nurse, received instructions from Monica. He was to start subtly sabotaging Edward's routine, delay his medications, forget physical therapy sessions, create small discomforts that would irritate his employer. The goal was to make Edward associate Gabriel's presence with bad moments so that the physical improvement wouldn't compensate for the emotional stress. But Marcus didn't count on Rose's loyalty. The housekeeper noticed the changes in the nurse's behavior and began to watch him closely. She saw when he deliberately administered medication at the wrong time, when he pretended to forget important appointments, when he spoke rudely to Edward in moments he thought he was alone. Rose sought out Joseph on a Saturday morning, before the rest of the house was awake. She told him her suspicions, showed him what she had seen. The driver listened with a serious expression, his jaw tight with suppressed anger. "We have to tell Mr. Sinclair," Rose said. Joseph shook his head. "He won't believe us. Miss Monica has him wrapped around her little finger. If we speak now, without concrete proof, we'll just look like we're jealous of the boy or against his niece. So what do? We watch, we wait, and we protect Gabriel. That boy is too pure to survive the dirty games in this house." Meanwhile, Gabriel and Edward continued their daily sessions. The businessman could now move his entire legs, flex. His muscles feel every inch of the limbs that had been dead for a decade. The doctors talked about starting intensive physical therapy, about trying to get him to stand with support. It was a prospect that had seemed impossible just 2 months ago. During one of these sessions, Edward finally asked the question that had been hammering in his mind for weeks. "Gabriel, how do you do this? How do you heal me?" The boy thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know if I heal you, Mr. Sinclair. My mum used to say that we don't heal anyone. We just help people find the healing strength that's already inside them. Your mother seems to have been very wise. She was. She always knew what to say when I was sad or scared. She said that love is the only thing that remains when everything else is gone." Edward felt a tightness in his chest. When was the last time someone had spoken to him about love? Helen hadn't uttered that word for years before she left. His children treated it like a social obligation. Monica pretended, but Edward was beginning to suspect it was just that, a pretense. "Do you miss her?" the businessman asked. "Every day, but I know she would want me to be happy. So I try to be." "How do you do it, Gabriel? How can you be happy after everything you've been through?" The boy looked into the tired eyes of the man before him and replied with devastating simplicity, "Because I decided to be. Sadness is easy, Mr. Sinclair. Anyone can be sad. But choosing to be kind, choosing to help others, even when no one helps you, that's harder. My mum taught me that." Edward was silent for long minutes after that answer. 7 years old. That boy was only 7 and already understood more about life than he did at 63. It was humiliating and inspiring at the same time. That night, after Gabriel went to sleep, Edward called his lawyer. He wanted to change his will. Not to remove Monica completely, but to include Gabriel in a significant way. If the boy could get him to walk again, as now seemed increasingly likely, then half the fortune would be his. The house, the investments, everything divided, it was the least he could do. Monica, of course, knew nothing of this conversation, but her own suspicions were growing. She saw her uncle getting stronger every day, more independent. Soon he wouldn't need a wheelchair, wouldn't need a nurse, wouldn't need her. And what if Edward decided to change the will? What if he decided to leave everything to that street kid who appeared out of nowhere? No, that couldn't happen. She had planned for years, sacrificed her dignity pretending to love a bitter old man, all to secure that inheritance. She wouldn't let a boy ruin everything. It was then that Monica began to plan something bigger, more elaborate, more cruel. If she wanted to get Gabriel out of Edward's life for good, she needed to destroy not just her uncle's trust in the boy, but Gabriel's very image. She needed to transform him from a saving angel into a manipulative demon. In the following days, Monica began to work behind the scenes. She made contact with people from London's criminal underworld, people who would do anything for money. She hired document forgers, unemployed actors willing to lie, and unscrupulous private investigators. She spent a fortune of her own money, but she knew it would be worth it. The Miu inheritance was infinitely larger. Gabriel, oblivious to all this, continued his innocent routine. He would wake up, have breakfast with Rose and Joseph, spend the morning with Edward helping with his recovery, study in the afternoon with a private tutor Edward had hired, and have dinner with everyone in the mansion at night. On weekends, he would ask to visit Mrs. Irene at the bakery, bringing baskets of fresh food that Rose prepared for the local homeless people. Edward would accompany him on these visits when he could, pushed by Joseph in his wheelchair. Watching Gabriel hand out food to Mr. Walter and Mrs. Teresa, seeing the genuine affection with which he treated these people society had forgotten, touched the businessman in ways he couldn't express in words. It was during one of these visits that Edward understood something fundamental. It didn't matter if the recovery of his legs was real or a placebo, a miracle or a coincidence. What mattered was that Gabriel had given him back something far more valuable than the ability to walk. He had given him back the ability to feel, to care, to love. But while Edward was learning to love again, Monica was perfecting her plan of destruction. In a few weeks, everything would be ready, and when the trap closed on Gabriel, there would be no escape. That night, the boy had a strange dream. He dreamed of his mother. Lucy appeared, beautiful and luminous, as she was before the illness. She held out her arms to him, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "Be careful, my son. Not everyone has a heart as good as yours. Some people hurt others because they are afraid." Gabriel woke up startled, his heart pounding. He looked around the dark room and hugged his pillow, trying to calm down. It was just a dream, just a dream. But something inside him, that same intuition that had guided him through the streets and kept him alive in the worst of times, whispered that a storm was coming, and this time he wouldn't have a cardboard box to hide in. The morning began like any other at the Sinclair mansion. Gabriel woke up with the sun streaming through his bedroom window, stretched in the comfortable bed, and went downstairs for breakfast with Rose and Joseph. But there was something different in the air, a tension he couldn't identify, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath before a terrible revelation. Rose seemed particularly nervous, stirring her coffee endlessly and glancing out the window every few seconds. Joseph was quieter than usual, his brow furrowed in worry. Gabriel noticed but didn't ask anything. He had learned on the streets that sometimes it was better to wait for things to reveal themselves. What the boy didn't know was that Monica had spent the entire night finalizing her trap. Everything was prepared. The actors rehearsed, the forged documents ready, the paid-off witnesses lined up with their testimonies. It was an elaborate, cruel, and perfectly planned scheme to destroy Gabriel's image once and for all. After breakfast, Gabriel went to the living room where Edward was waiting for him, as he did every morning. The businessman was in high spirits. In the last few days, he had managed to stand with assistance for a few seconds. The physical therapist said that in a matter of weeks, he might be able to take his first steps with support. It was extraordinary progress, almost impossible considering his medical history. "Good morning, Mr. Sinclair," Gabriel greeted him with his usual smile. "Good morning, my boy. I'm feeling particularly strong today. I think it's your lucky day because I'm going to try to stand without Marcus's help." Gabriel smiled and approached, extending his hands as he always did. But before they could begin, the living room door burst open. It was Monica, accompanied by 3 people Gabriel had never seen before. 2 men in suits and a woman with a briefcase. "Uncle, we need to talk. Now," Monica said, in a voice that tried to sound concerned, but which Gabriel recognized as false. Edward frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Monica, we're busy. Can it wait?" "It can't, Uncle. It's about the boy. I've discovered some very serious things you need to know." Gabriel felt his stomach tighten. He looked at the strangers and sensed something wrong in their eyes. They were eyes trained to lie. "What's going on?" Edward asked, now genuinely concerned. Monica gave a signal, and one of the men in suits stepped forward. He introduced himself as a private investigator she had hired to check the boy's background. He opened a folder and began to spread documents across the table. "Mr. Sinclair, I regret to inform you that the boy Gabriel is not who he claims to be. He is part of a ring specializing in scams against the elderly and financially vulnerable." "What?" Edward exclaimed, incredulous. "That's absurd." But the man continued, pointing to documents that looked official, with convincing stamps and signatures. "We found records of at least 5 similar cases in the last 2 years. Street children are used by adult criminals to get close to wealthy targets. They gain their trust, pretend to have healing powers or special gifts, and gradually begin to manipulate the victims to obtain money and assets." Gabriel was pale, his hands shaking. He wanted to scream that it was a lie, that he would never do something like that, but his voice wouldn't come out. The second person, the woman with the briefcase, introduced herself as a social worker and stated she had testimonies from neighbors in the tenement where Gabriel lived. She said the boy's mother was known for running small scams, that Gabriel himself was trained from a young age to cry and beg convincingly. All lies. Every word was a cruel, calculated lie. But the lies came wrapped in official-looking papers, in testimonies that seemed real, in evidence that had been carefully fabricated to appear true. Edward looked at Gabriel, searching for denial in the boy's eyes. But what he saw was fear, and the businessman, weakened by years of betrayal and mistrust, interpreted that fear as guilt. "Is it true, Gabriel?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Were you tricking me this whole time?" "No, Mr. Sinclair. I swear I wasn't. I would never lie to you. I just wanted to help." But the seed of doubt had been planted. The third man, who introduced himself as a lawyer, added that there were witnesses ready to confirm everything. People who had supposedly seen Gabriel with suspicious adults, planning scams, discussing figures. Monica, seeing that her trap was working, placed a hand on her uncle's shoulder with false compassion. "Uncle, I know it's hard to accept. You've grown fond of the boy, but we can't ignore the evidence. Please at least consider what's being presented." Edward's head was spinning. It was too much. Documents, testimonies, evidence. How could it all be a lie? He looked at Gabriel again and for the first time allowed suspicion to win. Maybe Monica was right. Maybe he had just been a foolish old man, desperate for hope, easy to manipulate. "Get out," Edward said, his voice icy. "Get out of my house." Gabriel felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Tears began to stream down his thin face. "Please, Mr. Sinclair, I didn't do any of it. I promise. I just wanted to help you get better." "Get out," Edward shouted, losing emotional control. "I don't want to see you here anymore. It was all a lie, all of it. You used me like everyone else." Monica made a point of personally escorting Gabriel to the gate. The boy could barely walk. He was so distraught, stumbling over his own feet, his vision blurred by tears. Rose came running, wanting to help, but Monica stopped her with a sharp look. "Mind your own business, Rose. The boy is leaving, and he's not coming back." Gabriel walked through the electronic gate and heard it clang shut behind him. He stood on the sidewalk, lost, not knowing where to go. The only thing he could think about was the expression on Edward's face. Those eyes that had shone with gratitude now looked at him with hatred and disappointment. He walked aimlessly through the streets of Knightsbridge until his feet, out of habit and memory, led him back to Notting Hill. Back to the Our Daily Bread bakery. Back to the cardboard box in the alley that had never stopped being his true home. Mrs. Irene found him there, huddled inside the box, sobbing in a way that broke her heart. The old woman knelt beside him, stroking his hair with gentle hands. "My boy, what happened? I thought you were living in that beautiful house." Gabriel told her everything between sobs. He told her about the accusations, the fake documents, about Edward sending him away. Mrs. Irene listened with growing indignation. She knew this boy. She had observed his genuine kindness for months. She knew he was incapable of lying or deceiving anyone. "This was a setup, Gabriel. Someone lied about you. But Mr. Sinclair believed them. He believed I'm bad. Because he's afraid, my child. Afraid people believe the worst things. But the truth always comes out in the end." Meanwhile, in the mansion, Edward was alone in the living room, his hands trembling in his lap. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, but it wasn't physical. It was something much worse. It was remorse. He looked down at his legs and tried to move his toes. Nothing. He tried to bend his knees. Nothing. In just a few hours, all the mobility he had regained in the past months was regressing. His muscles seemed to be shutting down again, returning to that dead, useless state he had known for a decade. Monica watched her uncle from the doorway, satisfied. Everything was going according to plan. In a few days, when Edward was sufficiently weakened, she would suggest modifications to the will, claiming the episode with Gabriel proved he wasn't in a condition to make important decisions on his own. It would be easy to assume total control, but Monica had made a crucial mistake. She underestimated Rose. The housekeeper waited until the house was silent the following night. She knew Monica kept important documents in her private office, a room on the second floor she considered off-limits. Rose had never entered it before, but tonight would be different. With a set of spare keys Joseph had given her, she opened the office door and began to search. She rummaged through drawers, cabinets, folders. She needed proof. She needed something to show it had all been a setup. It was in the third desk drawer that she found it, a folder labeled Contingency Plan, hidden under other documents. Inside were payment receipts made to actors, proof of transfers to document forgers, and Monica's handwritten notes detailing every step of the scam against Gabriel. Rose's hands trembled as she leafed through the papers. It was all there, irrefutable proof that Monica had orchestrated an elaborate farce. There was even a draft of a fake will she planned to have Edward sign, making her the sole heir and administrator of all assets. But there was more. Bank documents showing Monica had been siphoning money from Edward's account for over a year. Small amounts that went unnoticed, but which added up to astronomical figures. Payment receipts for Marcus, not just as a nurse, but as an enforcer of tasks, including obscure references to things he did to keep Edward weak. Rose knew she couldn't just show this to Edward. Her employer was in too fragile an emotional state. He probably wouldn't believe her, and Monica would find a way to explain it away or destroy the evidence. She needed a smarter plan. She took photos of all the documents with her old phone, put everything back exactly as it was, and left the office silently. The next day she found Joseph and showed him what she had discovered. The driver turned pale when he saw the proof. He clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. That viper. She doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as us. "We have to tell Mr. Sinclair," Rose said. But Joseph shook his head, thoughtful. "If we show him directly, he might think we're trying to harm his niece. We need to make him discover it himself in a way he can't deny." "How?" Joseph thought for a moment and then had an idea. He had known his employer for over 20 years. He knew how his mind worked, knew his pride, his need to be in control. If he did this right, he could lead Edward to discover everything on his own. "I'll leave a folder with copies of these documents in the car's glove compartment. Tomorrow, when we go to his doctor's appointment, I'll say I need to get something from there and leave him alone in the car for a few minutes. If I know him, his curiosity will make him investigate what I'm hiding." "It's risky," Rose pointed out. "What if it doesn't work? Then we go to plan B, but I know my boss. He can't resist a mystery." That night, Edward tried to sleep, but couldn't. He could still feel his legs dying bit by bit, the mobility disappearing like water slipping through his fingers. And worse than the physical pain was the emotional pain. The memory of Gabriel's face when he was sent away, those big eyes full of tears, that desperate voice swearing his innocence. Had he made a mistake? Could the evidence, as convincing as it seemed, be wrong? But how? There were official documents, testimonies, concrete proof. No. He couldn't keep thinking about it. He had to move on. Gabriel had deceived him, period. Better to find out now than later, but even as he repeated this to himself, the remorse wouldn't go away. The next day, Joseph took Edward to his doctor's appointment as planned. During the drive, his employer was quieter than usual, staring out the window with a lost expression. When they arrived at the hospital, Joseph parked and turned around. "Mr. Sinclair, I forgot an important document in the glove compartment. I'm just going to pop into reception for some information. Could you grab it for me while I'm gone? It's in a black folder." Edward agreed with a nod. When Joseph left the car, the businessman opened the glove compartment. There was indeed a black folder there. He pulled it out, curious. Maybe it was car documents, insurance renewal, or something similar. But when he opened the folder, what he saw made him freeze. They were copies of payment receipts, payments made by Monica to people with descriptions. That included theatrical services and document forgery. The dates coincided exactly with the period leading up to the accusations against Gabriel. Edward's hands began to shake. He kept flipping through. There was more, much more. Handwritten notes from Monica detailing how she planned to discredit the boy, proof of money siphoned from his own accounts, evidence that Marcus was not just a nurse, but an active accomplice in a scheme to keep him dependent and isolated. The truth hit Edward like a bucket of ice water. It had all been a lie. The accusations against Gabriel were false. His niece, the person he trusted, the person he believed in, had orchestrated everything. And he, foolish and fragile as he was, had fallen right into the trap. Worst of all, he had sent an innocent boy away. He had accused that pure, kind child of being a liar and a scammer. He had broken Gabriel's heart in the cruelest way possible. When Joseph returned to the car, he found Edward with tears streaming down his face, clutching the documents with trembling hands. "Joseph, tell me this is true. Tell me my niece really did all of this." The driver looked into his employer's eyes and answered with a firm voice. "It's all true, sir. Rose found these documents in Miss Monica's office. She set it all up. Gabriel was always innocent." Edward closed his eyes, the weight of guilt crushing his chest. What had he done? How could he have been so blind, so stupid? That boy had trusted him, opened his heart, offered his kindness without asking for anything in return, and Edward had spat on that kindness, had thrown the boy back onto the streets as if he were trash. "Joseph, cancel the appointment. I'm not going to the doctor today," Edward said, his voice resolute. "We have two things to do. First, you're going to take me to where Monica is. I have some truths to throw in her face. And then, we're going to get Gabriel. I don't care if he's on the other side of the city. We're going to find him, and I will beg for his forgiveness on my knees if I have to." The driver smiled for the first time in days. Finally, his boss was back. The real Edward Sinclair, the just and decent man Joseph had known decades ago. "Yes, sir, we'll do exactly that." But before confronting Monica, before finding Gabriel, Edward knew he needed to prepare himself emotionally, because he wasn't just seeking the boy's forgiveness. He was seeking redemption for himself. The car sped through the streets of London with urgency as Edward mentally rehearsed what he would say. The proof lay in his lap, each page a testament to Monica's betrayal. But more than anger, what he felt was disappointment. Disappointment in himself for being so easily manipulated, for allowing suspicion to speak louder than love. They arrived at the mansion in the late afternoon. Edward asked Joseph to take him directly to the office where he knew he would find Monica. She was there, sitting comfortably in the leather chair, browsing on her laptop, probably already planning the next step of her scheme. When the door opened and Edward entered, pushed by Joseph, Monica stood up with a rehearsed smile. "Uncle, it's good to have you back. How was the appointment?" "I cancelled it," Edward replied, his voice icy. "I had more important matters to attend to." Monica blinked, confused. Something in his tone put her on alert. "What kind of matters?" Edward threw the black folder onto the desk, the documents scattering between them. The blood drained from Monica's face as she recognized what they were. "I want you to explain this," Edward said, pointing to the receipts. "I want you to explain every penny you siphoned, every lie you invented, every second you spent destroying an innocent boy's life." Monica tried to maintain her composure, but her hands were shaking. "Uncle, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like." "Don't lie to me anymore," Edward exploded, with a force that surprised even himself. "It's over, Monica. I know everything. I know you orchestrated that whole farce against Gabriel. I know you paid actors to pretend to be investigators and social workers. I know you forged documents to make that boy look like a criminal. And I know you've been stealing from me for over a year." She tried to speak, but Edward wouldn't let her. You know what's worse? It's not the money. I have plenty of money. The worst part is that you destroyed the only truly good thing that has come into my life in years. That boy wanted nothing from me but to help. He didn't ask for a reward. He didn't ask for money, he didn't ask for anything. He just offered his kindness, and you, out of pure greed, decided to ruin it. But, Uncle, I did it to protect you, Monica tried, desperate. I was afraid he would trick you. Lies! Edward slammed his fist on the arm of his wheelchair. You did it for yourself, for your inheritance, for your comfortable future built on the back of my suffering. Monica realized she had lost. There was no point in pretending anymore. The game was over. Her eyes, once so controlled and calculating, filled with tears of anger and frustration. And what are you going to do now? Report me? Have me arrested? I'm your only family, Uncle. Your children are far away. Your wife abandoned you. I'm the one who's here. Edward stared at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. You were never here for me, Monica. You were here for my money, and now you're leaving, today. I want you out of my house in 1 hour. And if you're still here in 60 minutes, I will call the police and hand over all this evidence. I will sue you for embezzlement, document, forgery, and defamation. You'll spend a good long time learning the legal consequences of your actions. Monica opened her mouth to argue, but Edward's expression left no room for negotiation. She hastily gathered her things, her tears now of genuine fear, and left the mansion without looking back. Joseph personally ensured she took only what was hers, and nothing more. Marcus, the nurse, was dismissed the same day. When he tried to question it, Joseph simply showed him some of Monica's notes that mentioned him. The man left without a word, knowing he had gotten off lightly. With the house finally free of those who had poisoned its atmosphere, Edward allowed himself a moment to breathe. But there was no time to rest. He had to find Gabriel. He had to ask for forgiveness. Joseph had already contacted Mrs. Irene at the bakery. She confirmed that the boy was back in his cardboard box, refusing to speak to anyone, spending his days in silence, staring into space. The old woman was worried. She had never seen Gabriel so broken. It was night when Edward and Joseph arrived in Notting Hill. The businessman insisted on getting out of his wheelchair and being supported by the driver. He wanted to do this on his feet, even if it was difficult, even if his legs barely responded. It was a matter of respect. They found Gabriel behind the bakery, sitting beside his box, hugging his knees to his chest. Even from a distance, Edward could see that the boy was different. The light that always shone in his eyes had gone out. Gabriel, Edward called, his voice choked with emotion. The boy slowly lifted his head. When he saw who it was, he turned his face away, refusing to look. Go away. I don't want to talk to you. Each word was like a knife in Edward's heart, but he deserved it. He deserved every ounce of that rejection. Gabriel, please, I need to talk to you. I found out the truth. About everything. It doesn't matter, the boy murmured, his voice lifeless. You already decided I'm bad. There's no going back. Edward felt his legs give way, and, supported by Joseph, managed to kneel right there on the dirty alley floor. A 63-year-old businessman, worth millions, kneeling in the dirt, begging forgiveness from a 7-year-old boy. You're right. There's no going back from what I did. I can't undo the pain I caused, but I can ask for your forgiveness. I can tell you that I found out it was all a lie, that my niece set it all up, that you were always innocent. Gabriel finally looked at him, and Edward saw tears streaming down the boy's thin face. Why did you believe her and not me? I never lied to you. Never. Gabriel's broken voice shattered Edward's heart into a million pieces. Because I'm a fool. A bitter old man who spent so long being betrayed that I've forgotten how to recognize the truth when it was right in front of me. You offered me genuine kindness, and I threw it in the trash. Forgive me, Gabriel. Please, forgive me. The boy was silent for long minutes. Edward remained kneeling, not caring about the pain in his legs, not caring about the cold ground, not caring about anything but obtaining forgiveness from this child he had hurt so deeply. It was Mr. Walter, the blind old man sitting nearby, who broke the silence. Gabriel, my boy, don't let your heart grow hard. Your mother wouldn't have wanted that." And, like a dam breaking, Gabriel collapsed into sobs. He ran to Edward and threw himself into his arms, crying as he hadn't cried since his mother had passed. Edward hugged him tightly, his own tears wetting the boy's hair. "I'll come back," Gabriel whispered between sobs, "but only if you promise one thing." "Anything." "Promise me you'll never again let people's wickedness speak louder than the goodness inside you." Edward tightened the hug, feeling something inside his chest heal, something that had been broken for years and that only this boy could fix. "I promise, from the bottom of my heart, I promise." And it was in that moment, with Gabriel in his arms and his heart finally truly open, that Edward felt it. That familiar warmth he had known the first time he touched the boy, but now 1,000 times stronger. It rose up his arms, coursed through his torso, and flowed down his legs like a wave of pure energy. When Gabriel pulled away to wipe his face, Edward felt something extraordinary. His muscles responded. His legs, which had been weak and dead, suddenly sprang to life. Without thinking, without planning, Edward simply stood up. He stood, on his own for the first time in 10 years. Joseph's eyes widened. Mrs. Irene, watching from the bakery window, clapped a hand to her mouth in shock, and Mr. Walter and Mrs. Teresa stopped what they were doing. Gabriel looked up, surprised, and saw Edward standing before him. "You're standing," the boy whispered, amazed. Edward looked down at his own legs as if they belonged to someone else. He took a hesitant step, then another and another. Soon he was walking, really walking, without anyone's help. They weren't perfect or steady steps, but they were movement. They were life. He fell to his knees again, this time not from weakness but from emotion, and hugged Gabriel once more. "You healed me, my boy. Not just my legs. You healed my soul." In the following weeks, the Sinclair mansion was completely transformed. Gabriel returned to his room, but this time with the certainty that he would never be sent away again. Edward began the legal process of formal adoption, ensuring the boy would officially be his son in the eyes of the law. Mrs. Irene was invited to live in the mansion, occupying a spacious room on the ground floor. She and Rose became inseparable friends, taking care of Gabriel and the house together. Joseph was promoted to general manager of the properties, with a salary and benefits that reflected his decades of loyalty. As for Monica, Edward decided not to press criminal charges. The threat and the certainty that she was completely out of the will were enough. She moved to the countryside and never tried to make contact again. But the biggest transformation wasn't structural. It was in Edward's heart. The businessman who had been bitter and lonely for so many years discovered a new purpose. He no longer wanted to just accumulate wealth. He wanted to make a real difference in people's lives. It was Gabriel who suggested the idea one Sunday morning as they had breakfast together. "Mr. Sinclair, there are a lot of kids like me on the streets, cold, hungry, with no one to look after them. Couldn't we do something to help?" Edward looked at this boy, who, despite having suffered so much, still thought of others and knew exactly what he had to do. In the following months, he began the project of a shelter for homeless children. It wouldn't be just a shelter. It would be a place of transformation. With decent rooms, quality education, psychological support, nutritious food, art and music workshops, and above all, love and respect. Gabriel actively participated in the planning. He suggested large windows because street children need light and hope. He asked for a community garden because teaching them to grow food gives a sense of responsibility and pride. He wanted an open kitchen where the children could learn to cook and smell food being prepared with care. The center was named the Lucy Carter Institute, in honor of Gabriel's mother. At the inauguration, hundreds of people attended. Politicians, business leaders, ordinary people who wanted to contribute. But the one who cut the ribbon was Gabriel, standing next to Edward, who now walked with only a cane for support. The first group of children welcomed included Mr. Walter and Mrs. Teresa. They were given an adapted cottage on the Institute's grounds where they could live with dignity while receiving medical treatment and support. Over time, Edward recovered completely. Intensive physical therapy combined with his renewed willpower and Gabriel's mysterious gift restored his full mobility. He went back to work, but now his businesses had a different purpose. Half of his company's profits were directed to social projects. The Lucy Carter Institute expanded, first to other boroughs of London, then to other cities in the UK, and eventually across the country. Each unit followed the same model of love, respect, and dignity that Gabriel had helped create. Gabriel grew up in that environment, surrounded by love and purpose. Edward never allowed the boy to be spoiled by wealth. He taught him the values of hard work, honesty, and compassion. The boy attended good schools but never forgot where he came from. He visited the institute regularly, talked with the children, and shared his story. When he turned 18, Gabriel had a decision to make. Edward offered to put him in charge of the family businesses, to make him the heir to a financial empire. But the young man had other plans. "Dad," he said, Edward now loved being called that, "I want to study social work. I want to work directly with the children at the institute. The money is important, but it's not what will change the world. It's people who change the world, one life at a time." Edward hugged the son that fate had given him and smiled with pride. The 7-year-old boy he had found begging for change had become a man of principle, maintaining the purity of his heart even after all he had been through. Over the years, the story of Gabriel and Edward became legendary in London. Newspapers published reports, television programs ran special features, and books were written about the boy who healed a businessman and the businessman who learned to love again. But for the two of them, the real story was never about physical miracles. It was about the healing of the soul. It was about an old man learning that it's worth trusting again. It was about a boy discovering that kindness is not weakness, but strength. It was about two lonely people who found a family in the most unexpected place. The Lucy Carter Institute eventually became a national benchmark for the care and recovery of vulnerable children. Public policies were created based on its model. Other organizations replicated its practices. Thousands of lives were transformed. Edward, now in his old age, used to sit in the institute's garden at dusk watching the children play. Some ran, others played football, many laughed loudly, with that free and happy laugh that only children know, and he would think about how empty his life had been before Gabriel appeared. Gabriel, now an adult, married with his own children, continued to dedicate his life to the institute. His children grew up there, learning the same values that their grandfather Edward and grandmother Lucy, whom he only knew through stories, had taught. One Sunday afternoon, Edward asked Gabriel to sit with him in the garden. His health was frail, but his eyes still shone with the life that Gabriel had given back to him decades ago. "You? No, you saved me that day, don't you?" Edward said, holding Gabriel's hand. "We saved each other, Dad. You gave me a home. I gave you hope. It was a fair trade." Edward smiled. "No, you gave me so much more. You gave me purpose. You taught me that it's never too late to start over, to choose kindness over bitterness. You taught me that real miracles don't come from supernatural powers. They come from the love we choose to give." Tears streamed down Gabriel's face. He hugged the man who had been much more than a father. He had been his greatest friend, his partner in the mission to make the world a better place. "Thank you for believing in me, Dad, even after everything. Thank you for forgiving me, my son, even when I didn't deserve it." The two sat there in the garden, listening to the children's laughter, feeling the gentle London breeze, knowing they had fulfilled their purpose in this life. They had transformed pain into love, loneliness into family, despair into hope. The mansion that was once a prison of marble and sadness now overflowed with life. It had been transformed into a museum and educational center, telling the story of that unlikely encounter between a street boy and a businessman in a wheelchair. Visitors came from all over the country to see the place where it all began, to be inspired, to believe that miracles still happen. Gabriel looked at his father and saw a peaceful smile on his wrinkled face, and he understood that this was the true legacy they would leave. Not the buildings, not the money, not the institutions. The legacy was the living proof that love can heal any wound, that kindness can conquer any evil, that it's never too late to choose to be a better person. And as the sun set over London, painting the sky in orange and pink, Edward and Gabriel remained together, father and son, not by blood but by choice, knowing their lives had been intertwined for a greater purpose. They taught the world that the greatest miracles don't come wrapped in impossible wonders. They come in small packages, in the hands of a child with a pure heart, and in the second chance of a man who learned to love again. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Gabriel and Edward has deeply touched your heart. If you are moved by this journey of forgiveness, redemption, and true love, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment touched your soul the most. Every day, we bring intense and transformative stories like this one, which reveal the most beautiful and true side of humanity. Stories that remind us that there is always hope, always a chance to start over, and that love is the most powerful force that exists. We'll see you in the next episode with another narrative that will make you believe in the power of human kindness. See you soon.